Today is a very special day. We have our first direct user submission. This story comes from Big Boss. So, without further ado, I give you the Sinister 6. So, after hearing and reading so many RPG horror stories online, I decided it was time to share what is perhaps the worst RPG related experience in my life, both player and DM wise. This experience was so bad it contributed to me taking an over 9-year long break from playing any tabletop role-playing games for fear of reliving the same experiences again. Didn't matter if it was friends, family, or people I grew fond of online for Roll20 games. Luckily, this story does have a happy ending, but I'll first go over the lead up to the situation which caused the events in the first place. Then, I'll explain the events structurally in a linear fashion, and next, I'll break up the broader experience into the individual issues I had to deal with during the time span it happened, and end it with a very satisfying epilogue. Before I begin, I think it's best to explain a bit about my background with role-playing prior to the events. I spent the first 16 years of my life growing up in California. My longest lasting friend, who we'll call Jay, got me into role-playing when I was only 12. We were roughly the same age, but he invited me to another one of his friends' D&D sessions, who was, I believe, 14 to 15 at the time. We'll call the older friend Joe. Joe was DMing and invited me, Jay, and some of our other friends along to play some D&D, and thus began about 4 years of awesome gaming. We played many different campaigns, my longest of which lasted 2 years in a Planescape game as a monk, and at one point we got into Shadowrun as well. We played very often, almost like it was a board game, playing upwards of 3 to 4 several-hour-long sessions a week, which would mentally drain me as an adult today. In hindsight, we definitely played the game very poorly rules-wise, but we had a ton of fun. We role-played, and I have many memories still to this day of all the fun adventures we had with each other. Then, the 2008/9 crash happened, and my dad and I had to move out to Colorado because that's where all the work was headed for his job at the time. This ended 4 years of gaming with my group, from age 12 to 16. Fast forward, and I'm now in a new school. No friends and no family, and no one to play D&D with. As I was new, I decided to check out a few clubs to join to see if I could make any new friends with similar interests, and I happened to see a D&D club. I thought, oh cool, I could play D&D and make some new friends. 2 birds with 1 stone, I thought. I later came to regret this horrible decision. I called up the number on the poster and was told to meet the rest of the group outside the school in one of the club trailers. These trailers were used as a temporary classroom in case of fires or if buildings needed work done on them, but they also doubled as school clubhouses. This is where I halt the story for a moment and explain a few things. Many people have asked me questions whenever I repeated the story to them in regards to how I handled things, and I feel I should address them now. Why didn't you just leave? Why didn't you speak up? Why didn't you tell the staff?
Why didn't you tell your parents? Why would you put up with so much for so long?
Now you have to understand, all of this was considered at the time, but I was a 16-year-old socially awkward teenager with no friends who felt completely isolated and was both too scared and non-confrontational enough to really do or say anything. It really is as simple as that. I grit and bared this treatment for 6 months. Yes, I said 6 months. In hopes of somehow gaining new friends through a shared interest. This experience was the first harsh lesson I learned. That lesson being that nerds can be just as cruel, heartless, and rotten as any other social group. Now, on to the story. It started with me entering into the trailer, which I believe was also used for the music club as instruments and posters of musicals lined the walls. I met the club president/DM for the first time, a guy I would like to call Satan, but for the sake of this story, I'll call Craig. Craig shook my hand and introduced me to 5 other players, whom I'll refer to by class as opposed to their name: the Ranger, the Fighter, the Paladin, the Bard, and the Mage. I would grow to harbor a deep hatred of hearing these words for years. At first, things seemed pretty fine. I was nervous at first, as one is meeting new people, but the group seemed friendly enough. Craig asked me, "Have you roleplayed before?" I told him I have. Right after, he asked me, "Tell me about your adventures." So I talked for a while about the kind of games I played, the friends I made, and basically everything. I digressed in the beginning of this story, and then some. And all of a sudden the room started bellowing in laughter. I didn't say anything particularly funny or clever. I was just explaining how we played. The group was almost in tears. Craig, in particular, was wiping his glasses of tears and responded with the first signs I knew something was horribly wrong. "Wow, that sounds awful. Your DM must have been a total idiot," said the Fighter. The Mage started texting what I said to someone else and responded saying, "This story is so terrible, it's hilarious." I was pretty upset to see such a harsh reaction, but the DM patted me on the back and claimed, "Oh, we're just messing around." I stupidly thought the worst had passed. The DM asked me, "Do you have a copy of the 4th edition Dungeons & Dragons manual?" I didn't. He glared at me and asked, "Why would you join without a book?" I panicked and asked if I could borrow his, mostly because my old D&D friends had no problem sharing books. Apparently, that was enough to make me look like Hitler in the eyes of this group for daring not to purchase my own copy. He let me borrow his book, but only for character creation, and then you buy your own. I agreed, which I later regretted because 4th edition stinks, and we started creation. He started by asking, "What race and class do you want to be?" I wanted to be a dwarf for sure, since I hadn't played one yet, and asked if I could be a paladin. The paladin of the group responded saying he was, so I chose fighter. Then the fighter said the same. I even asked to play classes I knew no one was playing, only to get shot down. "You know what you should play? A cleric. Yeah, we need a healer," said the mage. At this point, I'm thinking, why even waste my time asking me what class I'm playing? I should note that while I was asking for classes, I was getting very sarcastic and exaggerated responses like, "No, because I'm the fighter." It felt like I was in a bad 80s comedy. It topped off with Craig saying, "Don't worry, we'll teach you how to play real D&D, unlike your old group." Things only got worse once I started rolling stats. Not because the rolls were bad, but because they were too good. I had my own dice that I'd used since I was 12. Lost them since this story happened, sadly. And I rolled 2 18s, 2 16s, and the rest were either 12 to 13. I got so excited for this roll, I let out a "whoa!" but the room was dead silent. Craig grabbed my dice, jingled them in his hands, and rolled them, rolling all 5s and 6s. He sighed, and then the other players grabbed my dice, feeling them up and weighing them. The DM pulled me aside and asked me, "Are you using loaded dice?" And I told him I wasn't. He then asked a bunch of stupid questions like, "Where did you buy them from? How long have you had them?" And after about 20 minutes of arguing, he told me I could stay in the club, but I couldn't use my dice. Then he said he was going to have to dock my character stats 4 points each stat, so that I wasn't overpowered. Outside, I could hear the group talking about how I was cheating and trying to fleece them. Fleece them of what? I don't know. But considering the horrible stuff these guys did in-game, it comes off as hypocritical as I don't know what. The first session went okay, at first. I played a dwarf cleric who specialized in smithing called Vulcan Firebeard. I was really proud of the character and backstory I wrote up for him. He was a servant of Elm, I think, and came from a long line of master smithers and holy men. In 5e, we have forge clerics, which gives a good idea of what I was going for here. His goal was to inherit his family's title by forging a hammer made of only the finest materials across the world, fine enough to please the gods, and later opening his own traveling smithy, and hopefully take on apprentices. It was a simple character motivation, but it justified his travels with the group, and I thought the DM could make some fun stories out of it. Yeah, I might as well have just thrown that entire plot in the trash for all the good it did, as the DM had no interest in developing my character beyond being a glorified heal bot and punching bag. Yes, we'll get to that. For now, all you need to know that this is when the story diverges from a linear story to descriptions of all the terrible things these players did for 6 months, 1 to 3 sessions per week, 4 to 5 hours each session. The first thing is what they did to my character. On top of giving him essentially no personal stories of his own, despite everyone getting massive quest lines, loot, and development for theirs, poor Vulcan was subject to constant mockery and ridicule by the rest of the party. My alignment was lawful good, an alignment they told me I must have for the best cleric spells, which was a lie, and tried to justify this in-character abuse by claiming that they were just playing their characters. In what way, I asked. Well, dwarves aren't liked in this world, you see. And the mage explained to my character, who lives in this world, why dwarves are so hated, but the best part is that they couldn't even stay consistent with their own lies, since they had no problems interacting with other dwarves. Things escalated when I realized, out of game, just how comfortable the group was with real-life racism. Real D&D apparently means alienating a member of the party. To add context, this group was whiter than vanilla ice, eating a plain bagel with cream cheese. I'm mixed race, but I look fairly white. But my last name betrays that aesthetic. These dudes were using every single racial slur in the book, in and out of the game. Cracking jokes, racial slur. Making friendly jabs, racial slur. Starting a fight with the enemy, racial slur. Dwarves? If it was me, you better believe they're gonna use those racial slurs. At some point, I pulled Craig aside to ask him, dude, what the what is wrong with you? But decided on a more diplomatic approach. He told me, it's just our edgy humor. Don't have such thin skin. It didn't help that on top of constant racial slurs, we got homophobic slurs as well. My character was constantly accused of this because, you know priests, if I wasn't being accused of sleeping with men, it was children. And when it wasn't that, it was, wait for it, racial slurs. To top it off, their humor started to bleed out of game, and those insults started getting lobbed at me, the actual player character. Eventually, I had enough of that and told them to stop. At first, they did, but then they found a new way to irritate me. Real D&D apparently means acting like you walked out of a clan rally. At some point, the ranger made a very clever joke and described my character as having hair that resembled one's nether region. This was apparently the greatest joke ever made to this group, and they all busted out their Eric Cartman impressions from South Park just to emphasize how funny they all thought they were. They straight up stopped calling my character Vulcan and just started calling him even worse names. I didn't find this funny, like at all. And to top it off, it was at this point that I found out all the party members had rolled stats with multiple 18s in them. I didn't say anything, but suffice to say, that -4 penalty I took extra stung. I brought it up much later, and Craig defended it by saying,
"Well, they rolled my dice, which I know for a fact are not loaded. So, they're legit, obviously."
I don't know if he was lying or not, but it didn't matter. The damage was done, and I was level 7 by this point, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. Real D&D apparently means playing favorites, lying to your players, and outright destroying someone else's character because it's funny. This next part requires some discretion because it's bad. After we completed a #super awesome oh my goodness it's so epic character quest line for the fighter, which involved him becoming a duke with hundreds of retainers, yes, at level 7, we entered a new town. This town was primarily populated by tieflings. Female tieflings. I warned you. The fighter ordered his men to surround the village, barricading it and preventing anyone from entering or escaping. He then ordered all the male tieflings executed and that all the women be brought to the center of town. The rest of the party, excluding me, and the retainers then began to systematically have their way forcefully with every single member of the village. Craig, practically sweating with the most evil grin I've ever seen, describes in passionate detail what the ever-living poop is happening, and I'm genuinely horrified. The rest of the players are obviously super into it, and are cracking jokes and describing in disgusting detail everything they are doing. In real life, I was genuinely shocked and horrified at what I had to hear, and my character might as well have just snapped and broke mentally from the imagery that was taking place. If anyone has read up on Nanjing when Japan invaded China in World War II, that is basically what happened. It ended the same way too, with the soldiers executing all the women and the town got sacked of everything it was worth. I asked the DM how in the world that this did not cause their alignment to plummet to mega ultra chaotic evil, and he just shrugged and said, "They were tieflings, you know, half demons." Yeah, and what does that have to do with what you just did? The group laughed, and the fighter responded saying, "Demons are chaotic evil, stupid. So what we did wasn't that out of character." Real D&D apparently involves recreating Nanjing 1937 to 38. Since nothing can possibly top that, despite there being plenty more problems, I'll wrap this up. Suffice to say, I wanted out after that. Like, badly. Luckily, the school year was ending, and most of the group, including Craig, were seniors. I called in sick for the last session and never spoke with them again. Suffice to say, that experience permanently damaged my love for one of my most passionate hobbies and caused me many issues regarding stress and social anxiety. I was absolutely terrified to talk about D&D after that. And since my only experience was with my friends outside of that game, I figured they must all be like this. Terrible thinking, I know, but just be in my shoes for a minute and think about what I just had to process for 6 months. Now, if I had typed this up a year ago, the story would have ended there. But it doesn't. I said there was a happy ending to all this, and now it's time to end on a positive note. In 2016, I started getting into exercise, focusing on my body and getting into good shape in the hopes of one day enlisting into the military. I am currently in the enlistment process. Fast forward 2 years to August of 2018, a friend of mine from high school, who was also my roommate, invited me to a Pathfinder game. It dawned on me I hadn't played in roughly 9 years by that point and decided, why not? Time heals all things, and I decided to get back into what I loved. I was stronger, smarter, more confident, and a happier person than I was at 16, and I really wanted to give it a try again. I went to a nearby game store to pick up a copy of the Pathfinder rulebook, and lo and behold, after all those years, I finally saw him again. Craig. Now, Craig didn't recognize me, but I sure knew him. For context, I was very overweight when I was in high school, weighing at least 260 to 270 pounds at my highest. But years of exercise and good eating helped me lose all of that weight and gain a lot of muscle. Like I said, I was training for the military at the time, and I'm currently enlisting now, so I'm decently built. Craig, meanwhile, looked like the same 130 pounds twig from almost a decade prior. Now I know what you're thinking, but no, it did not end violently. I saw Craig setting up a game as a DM for a group of younger players, probably high school age, and asked if I could watch the session. Craig said, "Fine by me." Clearly, he didn't recognize me and started playing. Now, to Craig's credit, he actually ran a pretty solid game. I don't know what happened, but his DMing clearly improved in those 9+ years. No slurs, no accusing players of using loaded dice, no bullying players, and no recreations of Nanjing. Nope, just a fun and clean game. I guess if it was a store, that'd affect the game more just due to it being a more public environment, as opposed to a trailer in a field outside a school. Then things changed at the 2 hours mark. Now, during this time, I was laughing along and having a really good time with the group, watching Craig and seeing if the old monster I grew to despise was still in there. I almost got up and left until a player asked if they could sell their gear at the blacksmith. The blacksmith in question was called a rude name that was what they called my character before. So, before Craig could even mutter a word, I stopped him and asked the player, "Say, that's a funny name. He wouldn't happen to be a dwarf with a long red beard and worship the god Elm as a cleric, would he?" The player looks at me shocked, asking how I knew that. It was then that Craig froze up in fear. To this day, I have never seen a face with more terror in its eyes than I did with Craig. I smiled, staring daggers right into him, and gave him the most evil grin I could. The other players, concerned, asked me what the problem was. I asked more about my character, and sure enough, Craig took my character and for 9 years made him a complete joke of an NPC. I stared at Craig and told the group that I was the player that made him. Craig practically soiled himself. He remembered me as the soft, non-confrontational fat kid from high school he used as a punching bag, presumably because of his own real-life issues. He started packing his things up without saying a word, terrified. I don't consider myself that physically impressive, as I have to stay under a certain weight limited for enlistment. But compared to Craig and the other guys in that store, I might as well have been Kratos from God of War, about to tear apart Ares. Craig left, and with 2 hours still left for the session, the players and the owner asked me what had just gone down. I explained everything about my character, the horrible things the group did, etc. The shop was horrified, and the owner told me that he heard Craig got kicked out of other groups, which is why he volunteered to host games at that store. Months later, I came back to pick up more books on D&D, Zweihander, and a very recent Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition. Now, fully back into my hobby. I asked if Craig was still around, and sure enough, he never came back. Moral of the story? Don't be Craig. Never be a Craig. And don't use war crimes as set pieces to live out your messed up fantasies. I'm glad that this story had a good ending, but it's unfortunate that Craig still hasn't fully changed his ways. I fear the fact that the members of the group are still walking around possibly proud of what they did. I also feel bad that Big Boss had to endure this for 6 months. This goes to prove the saying of no D&D is better than bad D&D. If you're in a game and feel uncomfortable, that's no good. Stand up for yourself, because usually no one else is going to do it for you. And with that, thanks Big Boss for sharing your tale. Let him and me know what you think about the story down in the comments below.